Much of the Australian economy is being kept on temporary life support, either via the federal government's JobKeeper and JobSeeker schemes or through loan repayment relief from the banks. These coronavirus assistance measures are slated to end after 6 months. But the coronavirus crisis is unlikely to be over by then, and unemployment's definitely not going to return back to normal levels, probably not for a couple of years. So people are wondering what's going to happen to house prices, what's going to happen to unemployment, our economy, when these relief measures are taken away. And there's lots of predictions coming up, lots of forecasts coming up. Well, that's one of the things I want to chat with John Lindeman, one of Australia's leading property market analysts, about in today's show, because many of these predictions are bound to be wrong. So we're going to have a chat about what you should be looking for when looking at forecasts. And he's also going to share a great analogy with you about a plane flight and our property markets to help you understand where we are in their markets at the moment and how to pick the turning points for when the market eventually picks up. Hey, maybe that's already happened. You're going to have to wait to hear what's going on. And then in my mindset message today, I'm going to show you 11 ways to fail. Now, you may not want to fail. Well, then knowing 11 ways to fail may actually help you not fail. It'll help you succeed in life. Hey, that's what this podcast's all about. So welcome to today's episode of the Michael Yardney Podcast.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney Podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator who has once again been voted Australia's leading property investment advisor. That's the 5th time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
As we start unravelling ourselves from COVID-19 and the cocoon we've been stuck in and the uncertainty that has caused, property market predictions are coming from all directions. They're ranging from dire warnings of an imminent collapse, property Armageddon, to assurances that the next boom is on the way. But what is ahead? How useful are these predictions, these forecasts? That's what I'm going to ask property analyst John Lindeman. John Lindeman's widely respected as one of Australia's leading property market analysts. He's had well over a decade of experience researching the nature and dynamics of a number of different asset classes for some of the very big data houses. He's a regular contributor to Property Update, to Your Investment Property magazine, and of course, a regular on the Michael Yardney podcast. Welcome, John.
Hi, Michael, and hello, everybody.
Now, John, you write regular blogs, and there were two in particular that I found very interesting and I'd like to unpack on our show today. And one of them is about property predictions and forecasts and the value of those. And the other is really where are we in the market and how are we going to know when the turning point has occurred? So let's start with the prediction side of things first, because whenever the unexpected happens, like now, everyone seems keen to predict the possible outcomes. Some of them are fascinating, interesting, but there's a lot of scary ones out there as well. And in general, just looking back, most are wrong. You say that predictions are not particularly good because in general, they make very sweeping generalizations.
Oh, they do, Michael, yes. They lump together all different types of properties as if they all perform the same way. And you and I both know that different types of housing in the same suburb can actually perform very differently over time.
Well, it's not just that. They talk about the whole market. So the Australian property market's going to crash. The Sydney property market's going to do this, or the Melbourne property market's going to do that. So they're lumping together the whole asset class, and they're quite different. Now, apartments and houses in the same state perform differently, don't they?
Oh, they can perform very differently, and I can see that at the moment we're looking maybe at some pressure on first-home buyer markets because the banks are not lending as much to those areas, or areas that are oversupplied, like urban unit markets. But they're totally different markets, and they perform very differently.
Well, I know you provide some really great reports, and one of them is the housing market predicting solution. That's your patented work, and I like that. And you do some heat maps, and I noticed that you showed that even in the same locality, apartments and houses in Sydney would perform very differently. So you can't just say, well, that's an investment suburb, because a lot of people say that, well, I want to invest in that suburb or the western suburbs of Sydney. It doesn't work that way, does it?
No, it certainly doesn't. In the example that you've mentioned, I point out that, say, houses on the northern beaches are likely to have very little risk of any price falls occurring, but units would actually have a very high risk, and that's because of the nature of those two markets are very different. Also, in the west of Sydney, units aren't at risk, but houses are at some risk of prices falling. So they're different types of property can perform very differently in the same areas.
And of course, it's got to do with demographics, the people there, their ability to keep their jobs, to have income that's coming in regularly or increasing income. So when people say the property market's going to fall, what are they talking about? Is it houses? Is it medium prices? Is it units? Is it all of Sydney? Because that's where one of the challenges with forecasts is, isn't it?
It is indeed, and I read these things like property price predictions, housing market forecasts, home value indexes, real estate market estimates. You know, they're lumping everything together as if they always all perform the same way. And because you're putting them all together and they're performing differently, it means you're getting the average, which means that it's of little practical use at all.
That's a problem, because many people read these and think, aha, now I know what I'm going to do. For example, in some suburbs, there are people in the more affluent suburbs, the inner suburbs of our capital cities or the middle ring suburbs. There are people who've been living there for 30, 40 years, and they probably don't have much debt against their home. There are people who have maybe been living there 10, 15 years. They've probably paid off half their mortgage. There's some people around who maybe have got a high level of debt. But if they had to sell up because of challenges, there's a number of other people looking for properties in that area. On the other hand, if you go to the outer suburbs, you're going to find most of them a similar demographic, aren't they? Young families. Or if you go to the inner suburbs and the high-rise buildings, the demographic's much the same too. So that's one of the challenges buying in those areas.
It certainly is. If you look at examples, say in Sydney, Ultimo, that 90% of the units are rented, but only 10% of the houses. The houses are multi-million-dollar properties, but they're owned by well-established families. But the units are rented by people who come and go quite frequently. They're completely different markets. An example in Melbourne might be South Yarra, where you find exactly that same difference between the people who rent in units and the people who own houses.
Of course, some of those forecasts, some of those predictions have got a vested interest. They're used by project marketers and selling agents. I guess you can almost make statistics say whatever you want, John.
If you use certain numbers, you can indeed, and they'll pick the numbers that suit their purpose, which is to talk up a market to encourage you to buy a property, and they'll get some profit from that, a finder's fee, commission, kickback, knock-on, or some reward. So their interest in making the prediction is not its outcome for the area, but its likelihood that it'll encourage you to buy a property.
So I guess one of the other thoughts is what you need and what I need, who are more mature and have been around for a long time at a different stage of our life, is very different from what maybe a beginner investment needs. So there's not one size fits all with these, is there?
No, there isn't. And it's also about what you aim to do with the property. You know, if you buy in an area that's got really high cash flow, but you're intending to do, say, a renovation, buy, reno, sell type investment, then cash flow is of no interest to you because you're going to not be renting it out. It'll be empty while you renovate. So it depends on what the outcome is that you want as to what sort of prediction you need.
Sure. And I think the other thing is be careful who's making that forecast, because we know in general forecasts aren't that accurate. But I've actually learned, John, maybe to do things differently. Rather than forecasts, I have expectations. I expect we're going to have another recession sometime this decade, but I don't know when that's going to be. I expect some of the investments I'm going to do, get involved in, aren't going to be that good. but I don't know which ones they are. I expect the property market's going to boom again and then prices will tumble, but I don't know when. I expect interest rates to rise. Now, probably not for a number of years. I don't know when. I expect there's probably going to be a world financial crisis, and I don't know when. But these aren't contradictions, John. I don't see it as a cop-out. You see, I see a big difference between an expectation and a forecast. An expectation, in my mind, is an acknowledgement of how things have worked in the past and what's likely to happen in the future. While a forecast is putting a time frame on that. Of course, in an ideal world, you'd like to know when all that's going to happen, what's ahead. But we can't. We don't know. There are just too many moving parts. Sure, there's all those statistics you can look at, but there's always that X factor, whether it's COVID or consumer sentiment. So what I do is I've found by having expectations without specific forecasts, I actually invest better. I expect the worst and prepare for the best, and that forces me to invest with a room for error. It psychologically prepares me. I knew we were going to have a downturn. I knew it was going to be COVID. I actually had financial buffers in place in case the market turned down because I knew something was going to happen one day. It got me through better. So when a downturn comes, once again, I'm going to be prepared for it. And I don't know whether it's going to be 2024, 2028 or whenever. Doesn't really matter. That actually makes a difference in how I invest. Similarly, I expect there's going to be an upturn. So I'm going to put you on the spot a bit because despite us saying we shouldn't forecast, I know you've been turning your mind to timing the turning point. So you actually gave a really good analogy about a plane flight. Would you like to share that with us?
I'd love to, Michael. It's the big question that I'm always asked is, and you mentioned expectations, but when do you expect that we've reached the bottom? And people always want to know this because it would happen after the banking inquiry, after the GFC, and right now people are saying, well, it looks like prices are going to go down a bit, but how do we know when they've reached the bottom and that recovery is on its way? And I thought the easiest way to explain how this works is to compare it to a plane flight. If you can remember what they were like when we used to fly on aeroplanes.
That's a while ago now, isn't it?
But as you expect to fly again, so do I, and I think that will all happen. But the property market, it's a bit like a plane preparing to take off. Everyone on board is excited. They're thinking about where they're going to go, whether it be in holidays or or maybe a work meeting, and they're going to be catching up on some work during the flight, enjoying the rest, or some optimists might even be looking forward to the in-flight food.
That's me. But I eat in the business lounge first and then on the plane, and that's my trouble. I've actually lost weight by not flying so much, John.
Yes. For most people, I think the in-flight food is, it's always the thing you look forward to, but always disappoints you when you get it. But anyway, this is the time when optimism is high. And in the property market, it's when buyers and sellers are keen, and both the key to this is that both sales and listings are rising. So they're both going up and everyone's expecting that prices will go up as well. So that's the sort of, the good time in the market. It's a bit like where we were just before the previous booms actually started. But then we get on the flight. And of course, the first thing you get once you're up in the air is the in-flight safety demonstration. And now, they're reminding us that things can go wrong. We've got to assume we've got to assume the crash position and learn how to use oxygen masks, see where the emergency exits are. We're shown how to don the life vests equipped with a light and a whistle. And you think, well, that's not very comforting at all, is it really, when you think about it? And if it doesn't inflate, they give you a little thing to blow it up with by hand. It's not comforting at all to know that disaster could strike. And that's where the property market is right now. Everyone's pulled back. They're aware of what could happen. And we're in a bit of a state of shock. Both listings and sales are falling. So the number of properties being sold are going down. The number of properties on the market listed for sale have been falling as well. We're all bracing for the worst, but it may not even happen. We might land safely. But if it doesn't, and occasionally, a few flights do end in disaster, and it does occur in the property market as well. It's when demand collapses, everyone tries to sell and no one is buying at all. So sales just completely crash, listings rise dramatically, and property prices go down. Now, these events are very, very rare in our history. They've occurred after the mining booms in places like Port Hedland and Moranbah, but they're very rare. Most times we land safely. And when that happens, of course, the passengers are now excitedly looking forward to their holidays, business meetings, catching up with friends and family. And in the property market, that's the time when we get a real boom. Prices are shooting up. Everyone's safely landed, is confident. You can't find properties for sale because buyers are snapping them all up as soon as they go on the market. And that's what happened, say, the last two booms we had. It ended in 2003 and 2018, exactly that situation. So the question I suppose you're all asking is, well, how do we know when we've reached the bottom? And if you're using those two indicators, sales and listings, they can tell you, because if you're looking at sales, and both of these data sets are available free of charge, you can go to different listing sites and you'll get the information there on how many properties listed for sale and how many have been sold, and just track them both and see which way they're moving.
So interestingly, that's back to the old supply and demand. And people would say, hey, it can't be as simple as that, supply and demand. But in fact, it has a lot more to do than that, because people are not selling at the moment. They're not putting their properties on the market because of the way they feel. And people don't buy at certain times because of affordability. So supply and demand actually encompasses a whole lot of other things, doesn't it, John?
It does indeed. It tells you in a nutshell what's happening. It won't tell you why. Listings and sales will sort of give you an indication as to where and when things are likely to change, but they won't tell you why. But it does tell us that right now we're at this concern stage. We've been given the safety briefing and everyone's sort of waiting to see what will happen next.
Well, basically, people, unless they're motivated sellers and unless they're non-discretionary sellers, that you wouldn't put your house on the market yet. Having said that, the number of properties being listed is starting to increase. It's happening week by week, partly related to the fact that auctions are now starting again too. So people are putting they're tippy-toeing into the water. There are good signs, a few green shoots, a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, John.
There are, and I'd say if sales start rising as well, then that's good. But really, what you want is the number of listings going down, the number of sales going up, is a really good indicator that things are starting to pick up again.
Sure. Of course, every time this happens, there tends to be a flight to quality. People during these times are cautious about what they buy. In boom times, people buy anything just to get in the market, so they'll buy those new off-the-plan ones. They'll buy on a main road, even on a corner, just to get a foot in the market. It's not the same at the moment, and that's good. So I guess one also has to see what sort of properties are selling, what sort of properties are being listed on the market.
That's exactly right, Michael. And our studies have shown that well-established family neighbourhoods always have the greatest price stability over long periods of time. And they withstand if we're going in for any sort of economic shock, they withstand these much better than, say, areas that are more susceptible, such as overinvested unit markets.
I think people are also concerned that we're going to fall off a cliff in September. They say that JobKeeper and JobSeeker are going to finish. There's going to be the ending of the mortgage holidays and the moratorium on tenancies. In my mind, the government has spent too much time, effort, emotion in supporting us to get there. I can't see them pulling the rug out from under us in September, John.
No, I don't think they will. And as you say, they wouldn't have gone to all these steps of doubling the job seeker payment, introducing JobKeeper. They simply wouldn't have done that if they were going to let us fall off a cliff. It would have happened when the first lockdowns occurred. So I think they've got a vested interest in keeping unemployment low, and putting us back into growth as soon as they possibly can.
I think they also recognise that we all own a house. 70% of Australians own a home. We either own a house or live in a house or rent a property. And on that basis, that's a common denominator for a lot of Australians. And we don't like to feel that our castle, our home, has gone down in value. So one way of increasing consumer confidence, because to get the markets going, to get the economy going, consumers have to feel comfortable about their jobs, but also about their assets. I can see that's another way the government and the banks are going to, another reason I guess the government and the banks are going to support our property markets, because they need consumer confidence to remain high. It's rising at the moment, but it'll be interesting as we keep getting all this news in the next little while. There's still bad news coming. It'll be interesting to see how consumer confidence holds up.
Yeah, it will. The next 3 months will be, I think, a real testing time for our resolve and for that of the government. But I have confidence, as you are. I expect that things will improve and we'll get through it.
Well, I think that's really, really important too, because over the years I've noticed that people with an optimistic outlook actually do much better in life. There'll always be the pessimists out there looking for the things that could go wrong or will go wrong. On the other hand, if you've got a positive outlook, it's very likely that you can see that if you've got a good job, if you've got security in your income and some money, the market's probably giving a great opportunity that when you look back in a decade, you're going to think, gee, I was smart, I was fearful when others, I was greedy, I should say, when others are fearful. Easy to say. It's not as easy to do, though, with all the negative news.
No, I can remember being interviewed on Channel 7 when the Sydney median house price hit $500,000. And the journalist said, well, John, that's as high as they can go. They can't get any higher. And, of course, now it's over $1 million. So it can and will keep going up over time. As long as our population keeps growing, there'll be more demand for housing.
Sure. So I think once the borders open, that's going to again increase our immigration and our demand for housing. But that's also why I see it as being a stepwise improvement in our economy. I can't see a V-shaped recovery because we're opening up a little bit and then there's going to be a lag and then they're going to open up a little bit more. But until we open our borders internationally and allow students and allow migrants to come back in and tourists to come back in, I think until that happens, we're not going to be back running on full cylinders again.
What we've noticed is in the past when overseas migration levels have dropped significantly, that immediately the housing market is affected. So I think that's why we're going to see some impact of that in areas where migrants tend to arrive. But also once we're past that stage and migrants come back to Australia, we're going to see some good property price growth and rent growth occurring.
Well, we started this chat by saying that forecasts aren't that useful, but I'm not sure that we actually made a forecast. We gave some expectations, which I think we both agreed is a useful way of looking at our markets. So when we chat again next month, it'll be interesting to see which way the markets are heading. Thanks for your time once again, John.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
In a moment, I'm going to share my mindset message with you. It's a longer session today, but I think the message is worth spending the extra time on because it's not about success, it's about how not to fail, which I guess is about success, isn't it? Before I do that, though, I'd like to just remind you there is another way that you can ensure your success, and that's get the right team around you, but it's also to take action because it's the right time for many people to set themselves up for the opportunities the current market is presenting. So if you're wondering what's going to happen to property in 2020, 2021, I know we spoke a bit about that with John Lindeman just a moment ago. You're not alone wondering, and maybe you're wondering, should you do something? Should you hold off? Should you wait? If you're interested in growing your wealth through property, you can trust the team at Metropole to provide you with direction, guidance and results. In challenging times like we're currently experiencing, you need an advisor who takes a holistic approach to your wealth creation. And that's exactly what you're going to get from my multi-award-winning team at Metropole. So go to metropole.com.au, find out what we do, leave your details and have an initial obligation-free chat. You may want some strategic property advice. Maybe you want us to help you build a customised strategic property plan. You may just want to use our buyer's agency, our wealth advisory, property management, renovations or development, financial planning. We're going to help you get the direction that you need in these uncertain times, the guidance of what to do in the right order, and wealth-producing results. Metropole.com.au. I look forward to being part of your wealth creation journey.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
Generally speaking, people live their lives in one of two ways: happily and successfully, or miserably with loads of regret about what could have been. Now, those who are happy and successful don't necessarily have a more blessed or lucky life than the other mob. They might even have exactly the same job, the same type of family situation, the same home, similar assets. So what sets these two polar opposite ways of living life apart? Personally, I think a lot of how we choose to live our life comes down to how we perceive things that happen to us. Look, take mistakes and failure, for example. While perceived mistakes and failures knock some people down, knock them down for a long time, others learn from them. They get right back up. They do things differently according to the lessons they've learned. I remember my early mentor, Jim Rohn, saying that it's too bad that failures don't give seminars. He said, because understanding why some people never seem to get anywhere in terms of happiness or success, no matter how hard they try, hey, that could be a very valuable learning tool, said Jim Rohn. So today, I want to talk about failures. I want to talk about what people do wrong, how people think incorrectly and don't succeed, rather than give you the 10 tips of how to succeed. So let's look at ways people think incorrectly, what a failure would say if he gave a seminar. The first thing he'd say is cruise along day by day. He'd say, who needs to set goals? Who needs to make plans? Let's just see what takes my fancy when I wake up. Let's stumble across each new day without any sense of purpose or direction. Of course, successful people do it differently. They plan to become the people they plan to become, because by having goals, by setting themselves goals and plans, they then achieve those, because their reticular activating in the system in the brain looks for opportunities that are out there. A failure would also say, hey, just stay in your comfort zone. To grow as a human being requires work, and more often than not, embracing the unknowns. But the failure would say, don't risk such stress. Instead, just remain in your easy, cozy little bubble. No, all success is just on the other side of your comfort zone. And yes, it does take a little level of risk to get there. As we go through a list of things that a failure would give in his seminar, he'd say believe in nothing. But that's because cynicism requires a lot less work than belief in something. Because if that's the case, you might have to act on it. So a cynic would actually point out flaws in everything and always look for what could go wrong. I bet you know somebody like that. I hope they're not too close to you, but the answer is, rather than look for what can go wrong, successful people say, hey, what could go right from this? Now, if we keep going through the 11 insights on how to fail at life, one of them would be to talk a lot. Why bother listening to what anyone else would say? You know it all, so make sure that you tell your story often and no matter how bored others might appear. Another lesson, valuable insight into how to fail in life is don't risk failure. That's what a failure would say. He'd say, don't try, because we all know the best way to avoid rejection or pain is not to give it a go. But that's the wrong attitude, isn't it? In property investment, in life, in relationships, yeah, you will fail. I'm a real success at failure. I've failed more often than most people, but I've got up one more time. So what else would a failure give as part of his seminar? And he'd probably say, take care of number one. Maintaining friendships and family relationships takes lots of time and energy, not to mention the potential sacrifices you might be forced to make, and the sheer inconvenience of it all. In other words, just look after yourself. That's all that matters. Well, as you become more successful in your life, you're going to realise that true wealth has nothing to do with how much money you've got, how many properties you've got, how many shares you've got. True wealth really has to do with friends and family, health, relationships, the ability to give back, the ability to help other people. So don't listen to failures, because a failure would also say in his seminar, never take the blame. Apologising or being responsible for your own actions, that's just so yesterday. Just look at all the litigation that goes on in our modern world as people look for finding somebody whose fault it was. Remember, it's always somebody else's problem. That's what a failure would say. But that's not how you're going to think, is it? A failure would also get up on stage and say, look, sleep a lot, sure, there's only so many hours in the day, but why spend them accomplishing something? Why spend them progressing when you can just get a bit more shut-eye? I'm sure you've heard it said that successful people get up early. You've probably heard of the 5 a.m. club, where a lot of successful people have got an hour or two's work done before everyone else gets up in the morning. Now, I used to poo-pah that and think, no, sure, they're getting more done because they're working longer hours. But, that's the way you get ahead initially. So now that I've put all those hard yards in many years ago, I don't need to work longer hours. I have a cash machine of a property investment portfolio that supports my lifestyle. But interestingly, my habits haven't changed. I still get up early. Now, I don't get up at 5 o'clock. I'm not such an early bird, but I usually set the alarm for around 6 o'clock, and I do my regular writing on thinking for my podcast and reading for an hour or two before other people are up, and that's often the most productive part of my day. Now, back to the topic of today's chat, which is a seminar that would be given by failures that you could learn what not to do, and then say something along the lines of always defend your point of view. Then say something like, remember, it's the only one that counts. If somebody disagrees with you, don't let it go unchallenged. Make as much noise as necessary until they renege on the debate. Well, I don't agree with that at all. You don't have to defend your point of view. In fact, what you should be looking at is maybe there are other point of views out there. That gets over that big bias called confirmation bias, where you only look for things that fit in with your preconceived ideas. And if they're wrong, it's just going to lead you down a rabbit warren of further mistakes. The trouble is, our human mind finds it easier to find another piece to the jigsaw puzzle that's already got in your mind, rather than to start off with a whole new jigsaw puzzle. But as I said, today I'm just going through a list of what somebody would get up on stage, a failure would get up and give a seminar based on what Jim Rohn did. They'd also say, stay guarded. Trust can easily lead to heartache and hurt, so keep up your walls and don't let anyone in, ever. Sure, well, not letting anyone in so that they don't hurt you, that may protect you to some degree, but it will also stop people getting in to show you how they love you. And as we've already said, relationships and people and family are a real form of wealth. And the last thing somebody would get up on stage and say if they were a failure was, always expect the worst. If you walk around expecting something good to happen, chances are you're going to be disappointed. How often have you heard people say that? So they say something like, don't risk the self-doubt and angst that can accompany unmet expectations. Surrender instead to the philosophy that life sucks. Well, in life, you get what you expect. So yes, there are two groups of people, like I said at the beginning. Those who are enjoying their lives, those who are successful, those who recognise that there are challenging times around us at the moment, but there's opportunities there as well, while there are other people who can only see the bad. Remember, I've mentioned it in the past, your thoughts lead to your feelings lead to your actions lead to your result. So your outside world is very much a reflection of the inside world. You've got to think in a positive way, you've got to plan, and that involves getting the right people around you. It's a bit too hard to do on your own. So having mentors, having groups of people, and in today's era where it's actually a bit harder to get out and see new people and meet new people, it can still be done virtually, but that's why I've always had mentors. I've always been part of a mastermind group. So remember, if you want a fulfilling prophecy of a life full of disappointment and despair as the ultimate loser, just follow those 11 points that I said that you'd hear from a seminar of a loser. On the other hand, if you want happiness and success, perhaps see if you can have a long conversation with somebody who's never found it and learn more about what not to do rather than just listen to successful people. Well, I enjoyed my chat with John Lindeman, and I hope you got benefit from my mindset message today. And if you did, please let somebody else who you believe would benefit from this know about the Michael Yardney podcast. Our listenership has grown enormously over the last couple of months, and I get pleasure getting the great reviews like I just got recently from Bradley Dean. If I read your review out like I'm going to read from Bradley, just email me, michael@metropole.com.au, and I'd like to say thank you by gifting you a book. Now, Brad left this message, Michael, I'm in my late 40s and only now starting thinking about investment. I've been following you on podcasts and blogs for a number of years. I wish I'd listened to your advice earlier. You've taught me how to change my mindset and build up my financial thermostat. Keep up the good work and looking forward to the next podcast. Well, Bradley, thank you for that kind message. And if you'd like to leave a message for the world, 1-star, 5-star review, whatever, wherever you listen to this podcast, please leave me a review. And if I read yours out, I'd be happy to say thank you and gift you a book as well. And as I said, tell somebody about this. Use the share button on your podcast app. I'll be back twice a week, but in between, you can catch me on social media. Just look up Michael Yardney or daily in my property update newsletter. Hey, if you'd like to spend 5 days with me and the best faculty I could put together, why not join me at Wealth Retreat on the Gold Coast in November? Have a look at wealthretreat.com.au. Catch up with you real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?